Thank you. We are delighted to be here. So SOSV asked us to convene today because myself, Mark, and Nat have all spent some time in part of our careers as analysts. That is, thinking about systemic change in terms of decarbonization, the climate system itself, and offering our systemic views on promising trajectories, alarming trajectories, and overall movements within the system that are particularly interesting for anybody building a company, anyone policymaking, anyone navigating the overall landscape of climate tech. And Nat, what are the bellwethers that you're paying attention to right now?
So, there's some sort of like Gaussian distribution memes that you can see about like what people do at the very, as a very novice and as a very expert in thinking about what's happening. When you're very early on, you tend to look at compound growth rates. And when you're in the middle, you tend to look at all kinds of complex, much more sort of differentially calculated ways of thinking about rates of change. And then when you get back to the far end again, you start talking about compound growth rates again. So I'm sort of at that point. I'm tending to watch the things that are growing fast and durably, and generally much faster than baseline. So in that case, I actually still do spend a lot of time thinking about the growth rates of wind and solar tech in a mature way. Early on, you watch them because they were growing fast. Now I watch them because they are the things that are going to start to erode incumbency. So we're very near the point where in certain markets, all growth has been coming from renewable power for a while. And then we're very close to the moment where in aggregate, we're going to find that case. And that means that like the system that we see as a whole in the power sector is just changing markedly. Transportation is already there. We're at a point where EVs are the only growth in transport. But I'm trying to sort of detect where those are going to come up again in sectors that are hard to abate, that are difficult to address, and that are very, very big and incumbent in their own way. So the exciting thing for me, let's say, is going to be to watch where those rates of change begin happening in things like sustainable fuels for aviation, in terms of decarbonizing cement and industrial heat, in terms of looking at sectors like steel, aluminum, and also finally substitution rates for these incumbent systems that are very well established for a good reason. That I think is super nascent, something I'm sort of looking for when they emerge. But when are we going to see sort of massive substitutions on a material level, not just the sort of electrons level that are going to get us towards decarbonization? And we're not really there yet, but the important thing is to keep an eye on where and when and how they might show up.
Mm-hmm. Concur. Mark, what about you? What are you tracking?
Man, that looking for statement, Matt, I like that one. I'm going to steal that.
You're welcome.
That's good stuff. I mean, so at CTVC, like we're kind of known for tracking funding, right? So in tracking funding, that's kind of the base level of how I sort of look at this sector. So the first step is to look if there's money going into it, right? And so over the past 3 years, or since 2020, there's been 117 billion that's gone in venture capital into quote unquote climate tech. That's across 2,500 companies and 3.3K deals. That kind of sounds like a lot, but it also sounds like nothing. And when you put it in the grand scheme of things, of how much gets invested across other sectors, but also how much that is supposed to be needed for true decarbonization of the economy. So it's just a start, but like everything has to follow a start. And so what we're looking for is those seedlings, those saplings to start to grow. And so what we do is we're looking in all these early stage sectors for, proof of life. There's a lot of announcements, that go into sectors like this, right? A lot of press releases, but how do you cut through the noise? It's such a trite statement, but how do you cut through the noise to look at things like actual installations of technology? Because everything in decarbonization or climate tech has to end up in the real world, right? And so you look at installations, so whether there's projects, whether there's a pilot or demo, you look at factories that are being built, ground being broken, partnerships between big companies, small companies, things like that. And finally, contracts. Are people buying the stuff that's getting built, right? Is somebody going to buy your green steel? Is somebody going to buy your low carbon fuel? Things like that. And so I think, I'll say it again, signs of life, past funding is what we're looking at most.
Yeah, I concur. I mean, I think what we're really tracking is to your point, that moment of potentially changing the physics and the chemistry of the climate system, of the foundations of the global economy. That is the most interesting aspect for Voyager, even though we are quite early and where we invest. To Nat's point too, I mean, I think the rates of change, excuse me.
Landline?
It is a landline. I'm at my
Wow.
parents' house right now. It's the past calling. Um, we're looking towards the future. Anyway, in terms of true rates of change, I think the fact of all growth in power generation being renewable, that the implications of that cannot be understated. And the electrification of light duty transportation, similarly powerful, both unto itself in terms of decarbonizing mobility, but also in what it implies for new ways of moving electricity, new ways of selling, distributing, purchasing electricity too. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at, to provide an example there, one of our early stage companies from Voyager is a company called Powerline, is enabling electric vehicles to collectively serve as mobile power plants, with the understanding and recognition that power distribution capacity on wheels by 2030 is on track to outstrip the entire generating capacity of the United States. I mean, that is a ton of power, and people haven't really grasped the implications of that sort of systems level change from infrastructure up. That's something I'm particularly excited about. So, in terms of this bright new future that we are in the midst of helping to create for a decarbonized foundation of the global economy, if you were thinking about building a business today and really getting started in climate tech and decarbonization today, where would you think about building a career, both of you?
I'm laughing because I'm not allowed to say like a research business, am I, Mark?
Analytics.
Analytics. But what I would say is I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that Mark is going to say something about a research business. I'm going to go ahead and say that I would be trying to build something in the kind of hard to solve problems of the capital stack, which is frankly a very ambitious thing to be stating, because at this point, a lot of the hard to solve problems, the numbers start with a B and they eventually grow towards having a T. But
Mhm.
I think that we're going to find, this is from conversations I've been having actually in the last couple of weeks here in Asia, a sense that like the first to tenth of a kind solutions to solving in a programmatic way how you deploy a lot of new technology is not yet there. It needs to be there. To some extent, these things kind of work on consensus and agreement to a very real degree. People decide, we've now decided that we're going to go do this. This is a technology to do. But the models at the financial level are not yet there in terms of getting people comfortable with a structure, with a set of terms, with a set of conditions to deploy something that hasn't been built, but that you hope achieves the same sort of scale that electrochemical storage batteries now have. And doing that requires a bit of invention and creativity. It requires some risk. It requires quite a lot of savvy, and it requires corralling a whole bunch of counterparties together. And in one sense, that requires a lot of innovation, but in another, it's just a very old-fashioned kind of bit of financial innovation towards a specific goal. So that's where I would go.
Mark, analytics.
I don't know. I'm outed because that is basically my answer. But there's a reason behind it. So my answer is like, what would you start? I mean, I'm starting a research business, right? Like, it's going. But the reason for that is because you realize kind of what you like and what you hope you're good at, and what interests you, right? And so like I thought as an analyst back in the day, that the trajectory had to be, go be a product developer, go be an investor, something like that. But then there came this realization that, you know what? No, I like research. I like finding out new stuff, and I like the research business as a business. And so for me, like it made a lot of sense to stay in this business, but also, as I identified gaps in this market, in the research market that could be filled, it made a lot of sense to stay in and build a career, around research. And so, like, what I would say to anybody, listening or watching is think about that hard, like very, in detail, about what you like, right? Think about what you like, what you're good at, and what interests you, and just follow that. Because you might think like, oh, I've got to go take all these courses, or I've got to go learn to code, or I've got to go, get all these certifications, but it might be a step closer than you think to get involved in climate.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think this, the world of possibility is not just lawyer, doctor, project developer.
Right.
True.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception there. And that's something that we actually at Voyager recently published a letter on regarding the true applicability of all types of professional experience in systemic decarbonization. It's, certainly any business that will grow to sufficient scale will need people who understand how to build basic businesses, really who are experienced in the foundations of business building. It's not just material science or project development. It is the entire spectrum of professional experience that comes to bear in building the future of the economy. And that was something that I think it sometimes gets overlooked in the overall narrative, where we focus really on the novel technologies that are particularly exciting. And there is room and truly an invitation for everybody here. And, as we point out in our overall letter, you are not too early, neither are you too late. And one thing that we've seen in enduring interest among investors, who are professionals in thinking through, well, what are going to be the foundations and the durable foundations of the financial system of the economy. Valuations have remained high in climate tech. There is a sense of momentum that is certainly not held up across the larger private capital markets. And this is a growth industry that is actively hiring across all types of professional experience. So I'm interested, along those lines, why do you think climate tech has had staying power given the overall market downturn in private capital markets primarily?
For me, there's an article that comes to mind. So years ago, it's just a headline. I don't remember where it's from, but it said, when everybody's done with social media, can someone please turn the light off? The headline was something like that. In that a lot of these things have cycles, that we're like so hyped about them, then we get bored as a society, right? And we move on to the next thing, right? But for me, climate, it's not going anywhere, right? There's going to be more of a need and more of a need and more of a need until we solve this thing. That's kind of thing one. Thing two is that there's all this sort of undercurrent or swell of support for climate, be it in public funding through the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, or that it's kind of an arms race to match that in other countries or jurisdictions, right? Like EU is putting in policy in place to sort of compete with the IRA. So is, other countries in Asia like China. They're trying to be leaders in climate, right? Because that is the thing that's not going away and is going to be around for a while. And so, it could be several of those things that are keeping valuations high. The sense that it's not going anywhere, but it could also be that it's still new. And so there hasn't been a chance to sort of get bored with any of this stuff quite yet. And so it could be early days.
Nat, your thoughts?
So I wrote a piece recently looking back, as one does, on a note from the deputy governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia in 2019, and he was writing about how you think about climate change from a monetary perspective. And he said that, the way that typically institutions have looked at these, financial institutions, fiduciaries have looked at this stuff is from a lens of weather, and that any weather-related event is something that we use to sort of ride through from a monetary policy perspective. But climate is different, and that you can't ride through these things because they're elongated beyond the timeline of any kind of monetary cycle or monetary set of impacts. And I think that there's something sort of similar in play here, which is that the macro prudential trend to be smart about climate is not going to go away. And I think all of capital is sort of beginning to reorient around that. I do think that it is a beneficiary as well of a kind of retrenching against, how shall I say it? Let's say minor solutions that solve the technology's problem, So I'm thinking of no shade, but like an NFT is an example of something that solved Web3's problem of going to market, but didn't necessarily solve any other really big problems.
Mhm.
Whereas in climate, we're talking about solving fundamental things and in the process creating businesses, goods, services that have intrinsic value and have products that are sold. And this is one thing that I think the three of us on this call know and inhabit very well, but a lot of other people don't, is that it's more than selling enterprise software to large consumers. Like, it is actually selling things that you, in the energetic sense, are the ability to do work in the form of a fuel or electrons.
Mhm.
But there are also other products. There are also services that materially improve doing your business. And I don't think that any of those things are going to go away. Like, we're through the point of sort of being able on an intracycle way of looking through or looking past what's going on in climate. And it's going to just have to be macro at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, completely concur. I mean, we see climate as, the investment in the durable production across, the economy. This idea of securing sources of fuel for manufacturing, securing food, proteins, access to heat to keep people warm in the winters and cool their homes in the summers. These are not negotiable. These are the foundations of the global economy, and they are, particularly in Europe, recently overlaid with a geopolitical urgency that has both manifested itself in price spikes for electricity, one, and in a recognition of, the securing the aspect of production across, the foundation of the economy for us is newly geopolitically important. That is something that we've been, heartened by, and we think that will certainly continue. And Nat, this is not necessarily, as you so well put, technology seeking its own solution set. This is how we live.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, that's good. In terms of emerging segments of the climate tech economy, do you have any favorites that have recently emerged? Mark, you spoke about things being new. And certainly there was the wave of clean tech 1.0 that guided quite a bit of investment into energy, solar, wind, and the first wave of storage. And now we are in a second wave of capital excitement regarding climate tech. What are you particularly excited about?
I'll keep this really short for sake of time, but there's a few things. One is really kind of a refocusing, right? Maybe not, some of these things aren't quite new, but it's a refocus. One on sustainable mining, right, and critical minerals. We're going to need a lot of them. Some of the methods, a lot of the methods for getting them out of the ground aren't necessarily new. There are a lot of new methods. But the focus on sustainable mining is a big one. The second one for me, it's no surprise to Nat, of course, is geothermal. I
Mm.
thought forever that new geothermal was sort of an intractable problem, an unsolvable problem that wouldn't be solved. I have changed my tune on that in the past few weeks, actually. And I think a lot of like industrial heat pumps and those types of things are deserving of the refocus they're getting right now.
Nat, what's top of mind?
I'm really excited about getting ourselves to a world of reasonably good energy density, zero thermal runway, 100% charge and discharge batteries with really earth abundant metals in them that don't have problematic or constrained supply chains. And I'm really looking forward to the Cambrian explosion, not of the hardware so much, but of what people do with it. And
Mhm.
I think that that's something that we'll see coming as these things escape the lab to the fab and then to applications for motive power, for stationary power. But I sort of look forward to seeing these enter into a really wide range, a dispersed range of applications, both in geography and in market need. And I think that's going to be exciting. And also to think about what people will build on top of these as businesses, not just on the hardware and the metal itself.
Hmm. Yeah, I am very much on the bandwagon of the promise of ubiquitous energy storage. It is so exciting. And with that, we are going to wrap up. We have lots to talk about, certainly. The future is exciting given the technologies that we are working with today. Nat, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this morning. And onward we go. Thanks again.
Thanks, Sierra.
Thanks, yeah.